Americans are consumers. We want the best, the baddest, and the biggest. Unless, of course, the baddest is the smallest. Then you want that, until the baddest gets bigger again. We're all consumers. Of course, nowadays, that kind of attitude can get you in trouble. That's the thing about money. Everybody wants to have it, but nobody wants to talk about it, which can lead to problems.
We owe what?
Let me see that. Hold on.
What?
Holy slick Rick!
So, yeah, the last couple of weeks, Brian and Brad both, they've been up here and they talked a bit about how they themselves are trying to be healthier. And so am I. And one of the main things that I've been doing is I've been going to the gym to work out regularly. Now, this isn't part of a New Year's resolution. I started intentionally working the gym into my rhythm last fall, and I've been able to make a habit of it. And one of the nice things about going to the gym is that 3 days a week, I do the elliptical, and I can set my phone up on the machine and watch some television while I exercise. And it's just about enough time for me to watch like 1 half-hour sitcom. And so this has worked really well for me. I get to exercise, I get to keep up on the shows that I like to watch. I even got new wireless headphones for Christmas so that I never have to worry about accidentally catching the cord and knocking my phone down where it bounces off the machine and into the wall ever again. Yet, even with the new headphones, I still did manage to drop my phone off the elliptical just this last week. It's got a sturdy case, though, it's okay. Now, with all this time that I've been able to productively watch television, I've even started watching something new, Blackish, the show that we just saw a clip from. Now, just this last week, I'm on the elliptical watching as the Johnson clan at the center of the show has to face their own financial reckoning. The bills come for Andre and Bo, and we see how all of that spending, but never wanting to talk about money, has gotten them into financial trouble. They had thought they were on top of their finances. Andre continually reminds everybody the rest of the episode that his credit score is 817. They've got this big, beautiful house, they've got good jobs, and all sorts of those biggest, baddest things that they were never able to have when they were children. But despite Andre's credit score, despite all appearances, they realize that they need a little less consuming and more talking about their finances instead. Now, fortunately for me, in my family growing up, my parents weren't afraid to talk about money, and they worked really hard to pass on a lot of good financial practices to my siblings and me. They taught us giving by handing us quarters to drop in the basket, offering basket every Sunday at church. They taught us saving by matching any money that we would put into our savings accounts. And that is a great deal. That's 100% interest if you do the math. Yet apparently I'm the only one of my siblings that actually take advantage of that deal as much as I did. And then when I got my first job, my dad taught me budgeting, and to this day, he helps me with my taxes. He'll probably keep helping me with my taxes for quite a while. I'm very fortunate to have the parents I have. They worked very hard to develop and keep good financial practices, and they taught us whatever they could by modeling for us and talking openly about money. Now, my experience, I know, is not entirely unique, but I also realize that not everybody has had this chance to learn about money from their parents. Many people don't like talking about money until they absolutely have to. It's one of those taboo subjects. So some of us here never heard our parents talk so openly about it with us. It was this adult subject kept behind closed doors or perhaps not really talked about at all. So maybe you relate more to the Johnson clan from Blackish. Maybe your experience is more like Rainbow, the matriarch of the Johnson clan, and her mom.
For once you might be right, Mom. How did you and Dad deal with money issues?
Well, as long as there was enough, I tried not to really involve myself.
Well, was there enough?
I suppose, yes. I don't know. Let's focus on Andre's shortcomings. He's very loud.
Mom, seriously, why don't we talk about money?
Because I don't understand it, okay? Talking about it makes me feel stupid.
Oh my God. Me too. That's why I gave Dre the job.
I did the same thing. I let your father handle it.
Bo and her mom are very smart people. Bo is a doctor after all. But they admit that they just don't understand money. Bo's mom gave the job to her husband, so Bo did the same. And perhaps this is how you feel about money. It's just a little too complicated, and it's easier to just ignore and kind of hope it works out, or maybe you hope your roommate, spouse, or future spouse is up to the job. Maybe instead you relate more to her husband, Andre, and his dad.
You lived from check to check, and now basically I'm doing the same thing.
Hold on now. I ain't had no shame about living check to check. That means I was getting a check, had another check to look forward to, and a pension after that. You just blowing through money fast. You didn't learn that from me?
Exactly, because when it comes to money, you never told me a damn thing about financial planning.
Well, back then, we didn't have any financial planning because we didn't have any finances to plan for. Food on the table, roof over your head, that was the plan. But you got your degree and a great job. This is on you. You don't have any excuse. You need to own that, Mr. 815.
819.
Whatever. Anything between 770 and 850 are basically the same. Saw that on Charlie Rose.
So Andre came out of a poor background. He never had much growing up, and he's very excited to have made it. He's got the house, the clothes, the gadgets, the better life for him and his kids that he dreamed of. But he's still living paycheck to paycheck, just like his father. You may be in a better place financially than your parents, but still making the same choices. Maybe you don't relate to the specifics, but you do relate to the situation, even if you got there in some other way. The bills came and you have found yourself panicked and stressed out about your financial problems. They're getting to be more than you can pay, or you're far past that and you feel like you are drowning in debt. Maybe debt isn't your problem, but you have this nagging fear in the back of your mind that you should be saving. Maybe just even save it all. Maybe instead you're just blissfully ignorant. You don't have any problems, you just ignore them all. In which case you still need a financial checkup. Maybe you're completely on top of this money thing. You've got an MBA after all. You know every cent that comes and goes, your budget is tight, your savings are robust. You're investing, you're planning for your children's future. And even if this is you, we still all need to talk about money. We still need to check our financial vital signs. Now, last week, Brad checked our relational vital signs, and the week before that, Ryan checked our spiritual vital signs. Those make sense. We are commanded to love God with all of our heart, our soul, all of our mind, and all of our strength, and then to love each other as ourselves. So it makes sense to do a checkup in church on how we are doing in those two areas of our lives. But money in church, isn't money the root of all evil? Well, no, that's not actually what the scripture says. What scripture says is that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And Jesus teaches the same idea in the Sermon on the Mount. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. So we should be careful with money. Loving money, putting too much faith in it is dangerous. And money can get in between us and God, souring the most important relationship that we will ever have. Money tempts us to trade our eternal reward for an earthly treasure that rusts and decays. But we also become enslaved to money when we don't steward it well. Money is a tool of this world, important to how our sinful and broken world works. It becomes our master when we neglect it, when we don't take time to manage it and check it, when we don't talk about it and learn to understand it. When our financial health is out of order, it affects our relational, our emotional, and even our spiritual health. We cannot be right with God when we are too consumed, whether it's because of worry, greed, or anything in between, with the state of our finances. 3 years ago, I found myself in a place of crisis despite all of the good habits that my dad taught me. I was back in Colorado and I was staying with my parents, and it was the week in between Christmas and New Year's while I was preparing for a ministry training on support raising. And I had not done a real checkup on my finances for quite a while, but I had to do that for this training. And when I took a good hard look at my finances for the first time in years, the full weight of my situation hit me. I was putting myself into a financial hole with my spending. The savings I had built up were almost entirely gone. My credit card bills just kept getting larger and larger, and I realized that my budget was out of whack. Not that I'd really actually been following it anyways. I entered into a state of shame and panic. And for that rest of that week, instead of being able to enjoy spending time with my family, including celebrating my birthday with my family, I was miserable. I didn't feel like I could talk to any of them about it, especially my dad, who had taught me better. I felt trapped. I was stuck between this place of celebration and joy and this training that I could only hope might at least help me get started on getting out of this financial hole. But in the meantime, I was just in this empty middle place, and I felt helpless. There was nothing I could really do. The anxiety and the worry that I felt was exhausting. It put me into this emotional pit. It pulled me away from my family during this brief time that I had with them, and it disconnected me from God. But as bad as that period felt for me, I know that there are some here who have seen unhealthy finances do significantly more damage than that. Money can drive people to desperation. It can tear families apart. I have a friend whose parents had a lot of problems in their marriage, but money was one of the worst ones. Near the end of their marriage, they had lost all of their trust in one another with regards to money. They didn't trust each other to spend wisely and care for the whole family, and not to make these selfish, excessive purchases. So they couldn't even trust one another with buying food for the children. So then it fell all on my friend, who was just a high schooler at the time, to do all of the grocery shopping for the family. She was the only one that both parents could actually trust with the money. And that is a lot to put on a child who is going through the midst of the hardest period of her life, watching her family fall apart. And it wasn't too much longer after that when her parents did get divorced. This is why this matters to God. God cares that we steward our finances wisely, because when we don't, money pulls us away from God. It pulls us from the people we love and from the perfect creation that God intended for us to be. It matters so much to God that the Bible addresses it over 2,000 times. As we will see this morning, Proverbs in particular has a lot to say on the matter, and even Jesus teaches about it more than a few times. In your meeting, like the last couple of weeks, there is a handout with a few different scales on it. And you can use it this morning to measure where you think you are at in these different financial vital signs. And this is just for you. If you're married, for you and your spouse. But so don't worry about like what your neighbor is marking. Just try to be honest with yourself. And now, if this is the only time that you have checked the vital signs of your finances, then, well, we're off to a rough start. I encourage you to make this a part of your life. And that starts with the first vital sign, a realistic budget. Proverbs tells us to do your planning and prepare your fields before building your house. So in the ancient world, fields were the primary source of income, whereas houses consumed income. So this proverb is pretty simple. Earn income, then spend it. Yet nowadays, we kind of often get that backwards. A lot of Americans spend money before we ever even have it. We could build like a whole financial help plan just around, don't buy stuff you cannot afford. And this is something that even Jesus teaches in Luke. Don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. A budget is just a simple tool to make sure that we don't have more money going out, expenses, than what we have coming in, our income. And here's an even simpler definition from John Maxwell, a pastor and Christian author. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. So look at your card and check your first vital sign. When it comes to budgeting, are you unaware about where your money goes, or are you disciplined? You have a budget and you stick to it. Or you don't really know. You don't ever check. Or maybe you're just somewhere in the between. How aware are you of where your money goes? If you're unaware, you honestly may not be too stressed out about it. After all, ignorance is bliss. It all just kind of works out. But I promise you, at some point, it will hit the fan like it did for me. Now, if that hasn't happened yet, you can stop that from happening now. If you don't have a budget, I highly recommend you make one as soon as you can. There are good tools online, and I encourage you to try out a budgeting app like Mint. It's what I use. It will automatically track your expenses, and you can use it mobily so that you always know where your budget is at. And a good, realistic budget starts with your income, whether it's money from your job, your parents, loans, or a stipend, just any money you have coming in. If you don't have a job, you aren't really sure what your income is. I know students, this can get a little more hazy. Just consider the fact that I'm sure you are spending money, and you need a budget. You're spending at least. Then you start kind of adding in consistent expenses that you know you're going to have to pay every month that aren't going to change too much: rent or mortgage, loan payments, utilities bills, etc. Then with what is left, figure out what you can afford to spend on food, gas, for your car, personal care, shopping, entertainment, and more. You may find that you have to save money by spending, by buying more groceries and cooking your own meals and eating out less. You may have to cut down on some of your more expensive hobbies. You may have to drive less and start using your bike more to get around. And at first, a budget may feel limiting, but as you get used to it, it becomes very freeing. Because you don't have to worry about, like, am I overspending? Or you don't have to stress out about what you can afford or not afford. Like, you can go out to eat knowing that, like, you have this $20 or whatever, like, set aside for this meal. You can buy concert tickets with the confidence of knowing that, like, you have the money for it. And as you get used to it, you can adjust it. You can adjust it from month to month. You aren't bound to, like, what you set. It's just a tool that you can help and to help you track your spending and free you from the stress of not knowing where it's going. Now, if you're somewhere in between, say you do have a budget, but you don't really stick to it, then look over your budget, review it. Because it may not be very realistic. Maybe it doesn't actually have enough for food, so you need to adjust. You need to spend a little more on food. Change what you need to change so that you actually stick to the budget. And then that's the important part of this. Wherever you're at, it's one thing to make a budget, but that doesn't help anything if you don't stick to it. That's where I was at. I had a budget for years before I ever actually followed it, until the full wave of my poor financial discipline hit me all at once. Fortunately for me, due to another lesson I had learned from my dad, my panic hit when I realized that one more month of my spending habits would leave me unable to pay my full credit card bill and start building up debt, rather than after that point. So I never actually got myself into debt after following my dad and his model for me, because he always treated his credit cards like same as cash. Anything he bought in credit was good as money spent. And his model is so deeply ingrained in me that I couldn't even consider debt an option for myself. Which leads us into our next vital sign: freedom from debt. Proverbs warns us that just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. Now, this one can be a little tricky because I realize that a lot of people here are college students, or were college students, or you're a grad student who plans on pretty much being a college student forever. So I recognize that there are a fair number of people here who probably have some student loan debt. So I'm not here to declare that all debt is evil and everything is a terrible mistake. Because there's a lot of different kinds of debt. In addition to student loans, there's mortgages, car loans, credit card debt, all sorts. And some of that isn't necessarily bad. I mean, it's unlikely that many of us could ever buy our first house without a mortgage. A wise car purchase can be worth the debt. And if you're on your own paying for college, it's very difficult to cover rising tuition costs without some loans. That said, Proverbs is pretty clear that we should stay out of debt. And Paul writes that the only thing we should ever owe anyone is love. So be wise about the debt you take on. Don't buy more house than you can afford. If you can save up for a car and buy it outright, do it. If you need to make any of these large purchases, seek out the counsel of a wise friend like Brad, who spoke last week. He's got an MBA. He's very smart. He knows what he's doing. If you're a student, seek out scholarships and whatever else you can to pay for college other than student loans. There are some creative ways that you can help pay your tuition but they will take more work than getting a loan. Heck, my wife learned Arabic to pay for college, and now she works as a graduate assistant to pay for her master's. But there are some very bad and some very dangerous types of debt that we do need to avoid at all costs, like credit card debt. Never carry a balance on your credit cards. I've heard it said like that you should carry some balance from month to month to help build up your credit. That is not true. Chris, I like Chris. He's like, no, I agree. Don't do that. I don't know if that's true at all, but it's not worth it. It's certainly not worth it. Like, yeah, I have built up my own credit pretty high just by using my cards and paying them off entirely every month. The interest, the credit card interest is horrible. Do not pay it if you can help, do whatever it takes. If you cannot pay off all of a credit card, my advice would be just cut that card up. Cut that card up, stop using credit cards in general until you can pay them off. They are helpful for building up credit and making use of the various rewards that many of them offer, but they are not worth it one bit if it means going into debt. Payday and title loans are another type of debt that we should all avoid. These specifically target and prey on people with low income who are desperate for quick cash, but they are traps that will only make the situation worse. They are about as evil as a legal practice can be. So avoid those and avoid any other quick fix debt solution. If anybody here is ever at that point where you're so desperate that you're considering a quick fix money solution like a title loan or using credit cards to cover a large expense, or anything, come talk to Ryan or I. DR has a benevolence fund that can help. Not saying that like we can or will ever just fix all your problems, but we don't want anybody here to have to feel like they have to make a decision that could put them deeper and deeper into a financial pit. So considering that some debt can be useful or at least a little unavoidable, while other debt is incredibly dangerous, let's measure this vital sign this way. Are you drowning in debt or are you walking on water? Are you debt-free? You pay off your whole credit card balance every month, or you don't even use credit cards. You just pay for everything with cash or debit. Or you don't have any student loans, you don't have car payments, you don't have a mortgage, you have no debt. If you have no debt, go ahead, you can mark yourself high on this one, that one's easy. But just be careful and do your best to kind of stay this way. Because perhaps you will need to go into debt one day. You need to buy a car, or you're ready for that big purchase, you're buying a home. Just when you do that, be wise about it and make sure that you can manage paying that debt back within your budget. And on that note, some people, you're not totally debt free, but you are managing your debt well. You're consistently, you're making monthly payments, you made wise choices with the loans you took out, you have debt, but you're on top of it, and you're managing it well. If this is you, mark yourself wherever along the line that you feel you are. If you feel like you are comfortably on top of your debt, feel free to give yourself a high mark. But then the other end of the spectrum is you are drowning. Maybe you're 6 years into college and you're on your 6th change of major. Your student loans aren't really so much, no longer really a tool for your future. They're just a backhoe helping you dig a deeper hole. Maybe you bought a bigger car than you could afford. You wanted that dream car, and now you can't pay for it. Just be honest with yourself if you feel like you are drowning. If you do feel like you are drowning, however, if that's where you are at, here is a practical method for dealing with debt from Dave Ramsey, a Christian speaker who teaches good biblical financial stewardship. Now this method he teaches isn't as easy as any of those quick fix schemes, but becoming free of debt is well worth the hard work. So Dave Ramsey, what he suggests is what he calls the snowball method for paying off your debts. Organize all of your debts just organize them all from the smallest to largest, and then just start paying them off, starting at the smallest and working your way up. Just that satisfaction of freeing yourself from one debt, then the next, will give you the confidence and momentum to build up to the bigger and bigger debts. Like a snowball rolling down the hill, picking up more and more snow and building up more and more momentum. Okay. Now, after checking our debt, we can check our vital sign of wise savings. So again, we look at Proverbs, which encourages us to save. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. It is wise to save up a portion of our money. Well, it is foolish to spend it all, to gulp it down, as Proverbs say. And another proverb teaches us why it is wise to save. Know the state of your flock and put your heart into caring for your herds, for riches don't last forever, and the crown might not be passed to the next generation. We need to save up because we simply do not know what's going to happen in life. We may lose our job, our scholarship might not get funded, we might have a medical emergency. I know it may feel more spiritual to just trust in God, like God take care of us. But the Bible is clear that preparedness is no less spiritual. It encourages it. So we should be careful to not spiritualize foolishness. So have an emergency fund. Dave Ramsey, again, he recommends that you start with $1,000 if you're in debt, and then when you get out of debt, work up to 3 to 6 months of your expenses, depending on how stable your income is. When you budget, before you put in any of the other expenses, put in a line for savings until you have a full emergency fund. This way you are prepared for the unexpected car trouble, and you could handle a medical emergency, or you could survive a temporary loss of income. We cannot be prepared for everything, but an emergency fund does help us prepare for a lot. And then after that, save up for things as much as you can. Save up for the new car or new appliances for your home. Save up for the big trip that you want to take. Plan ahead and save up for it. Then you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for it, or you don't have to take out debt that will end up costing you even more with interest. Then there's long-term saving. Do you want to work forever or save for retirement? Do you want to save for your children's college funds? I know there's stuff out there like this, like 401ks, IRAs, CDs, MBAs, MLBs. Honestly, if anybody caught on, I just started listing random acronyms there at the end. I admit this is an area where I've not yet really learned much about what those are, but I do know there's some good stuff out there for developing a long-term savings. And this is an area where I'm going to go at some point to my dad. I'm going to learn even more about this. But again, if you want to learn from somebody here, I imagine Brad knows what he's talking about. I'm guessing there's some other people here. There are resources around us. And so let's check this vital sign. Are you living paycheck to paycheck, or are you prepared for whatever may happen? Could you lose your paycheck for a few months, or could handle the unexpected? Or are you even starting to prepare for the future? You're already at that point. Or maybe you're not all the way there yet, but you're working on building up your savings. Just wherever you feel like you're at, just mark along the line where you think you're at. From no savings, working on it. You're ready to retire at 30. I doubt anybody's there. If you're there, raise your hand and you're taking over the message. You got it from here. Now, as I do talk about savings, keep in mind we're talking about wise savings, because savings is good, but don't become Scrooge. If I could somehow add another part to the line, I guess make it a triangle at this point, the extra part would be Scrooge. He pinched and saved every penny. He never spent anything, even on his own comfort. He saved all of this money and was generous towards no one, not even himself. He took saving to the absolute extreme. Because nothing was worth spending that money. Nothing was worth just the value of having it for himself. But at that point, it just becomes worthless. I have another friend who once told me about her father's goal to save a certain amount of money. He had this number in his mind. It was a very high number. And by the way she described it, it honestly sounded to me like it was a video game. And he was trying to achieve the high score, and money was the points. For her father, there really wasn't any purpose to saving. Instead, saving was his purpose. And this led to him being stingy with his money, and it created barriers between him and his children. Now, my dad has also always been carefully saving his whole life, saving for his children to college, planning for his and my mom's retirements, which is imminent, which is exciting for them, and for preparing for the unexpected. But his saving never kept him from spending on what really mattered. I've seen him open up his pocketbook for celebration dinners, give my mom a blank check to buy a family portrait for their 25th anniversary, and just be incredibly generous towards others. Yet I visited my parents around the same time that my friend was telling me about her dad, and my mom confided me with so much pride in her husband, the milestone that they had hit with their savings, after years of hard work and sacrificing for themselves to prepare for the future. And it was the same number that my friend's father had built his entire purpose around. So we need to save wisely, but don't get it backwards. Save up to help you achieve your God-given purpose in life, but don't let saving up money become your purpose in and of itself. And this is at the heart of our final vital sign, generous giving. To Proverbs one last time. Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. So don't be a Scrooge. Save wisely, but give freely. Proverbs has a saying for everything, it feels like at this point, at least with regards to finances. Now, according to Proverbs, the best savings plan, the best way to become wealthy is to give it away. I don't know how that makes sense, but that's what Proverbs says. But here's the deal, according to Psalms. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. So keep in mind, none of it is ours anyway. Everything comes from God, and God tells us to give out of what we have been given. We are blessed to be a blessing, and our finances are a part of that. We are told to give, and even given specific instruction for our giving. In the Bible, we can find the practice of tithing. That's giving 10% of your income. Now, if you're a student, and again, you don't precisely have a regular income, consider what you're spending. We are encouraged to give at least 10% of that. And again, that's at least. Because in ancient Israel, there were actually 3 tithes. 10% to the priests and Levites, 10% for sacred celebrations, and then once every 3 years, another 10% to support the poor, the widows, and the orphans. So that ends up being more like 23% every year. There is no cap in the Bible toward generosity, and there certainly isn't a cap to God's generosity. Some of us struggle with giving. We fear that if we give away that 10%, we won't have enough left. There's scarcity. There isn't enough money to go around. Some of us struggle with giving for other reasons. I know some Christ followers regard the tithe as just another part of the Old Testament and the law that we no longer follow. Or they instead just tithe with their talents and time instead of their money. Maybe this is true. But I do question that if this is what we believe, I think we need to consider our heart condition. Because this isn't the same as a direction to not eat pork. This is a command to give and bless others freely. So why are we trying to justify not being generous? Why are we not trusting God with our finances? Consider Jesus' response when a rich young man asked him about how he could gain entrance into the kingdom of heaven. This man assured Jesus that he followed all of the law. He loved God with all his heart and soul, and he loved others well. If he was here the last couple of weeks, he just marked himself off high on everything with relationship and spiritual. He was set. But then Jesus told him there was one more thing that he had to do. Jesus told him, if you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. But when the young man heard this, he went away sad, for he had many possessions. Now, I'm not raising that 10 or 23% to 100%, but do consider this. This man is only known as the rich young man. That's it. His identity is his wealth. He doesn't know who he is without it. He is afraid that he will not be enough. He is afraid of the scarcity that he will find within himself. Jesus asks him to give that up, to give up the wealth that defines him, to give up this identity, because only then will he be enough. Only then can he truly be free to follow Jesus and find his identity in Christ alone. Only then could he hope to be remade by grace into the perfect design that God has for him. If we're not willing to give up, if we're not willing to give at least a portion of our finances, which God has given to us in the first place, then I fear that we will start to find more and more of ourselves in this rich young man, unwilling and unable to trust enough in Jesus to let him reshape who we are. Tithing is a practice in trusting God. It is like training wheels to help us learn to trust God and to be generous. Tithing is learning to trust that 90% of your income with God's blessing is more than 100% of our income without God's blessings. So when you make your budget, before your expenses or even before your savings, plug in giving. Give your first 10% to God, or more if you can. And you will discover that you have more than enough. And you will grow in trust and cultivate a generous heart. And this may seem crazy to others who are trying to get ahead and move from point A to point B in life. But when you tithe, you are trusting that not only that 90% of your income will move you from A to B, but that God has even more in mind. And you could end up at a place of blessing at point C that you didn't even know was possible. So where are you at with your generosity? Are you held back by fear of scarcity, or do you give joyously? If we give our money away, yes, we have less. That's less for our bills, for our rent or mortgage. That's less to put towards new shoes for our child. Are we afraid of scarcity? Are we afraid there won't be enough? Or do we trust in God to not just give, but give joyously? Consider where you're at and mark yourself on this vital sign. Now, maybe you don't quite feel like you fall on either end of the spectrum. You're not really giving, especially maybe not giving joyously, but it's not an issue of fear of scarcity that's holding you back. But then why? What is holding you back? If you do not tithe, if you don't give, I encourage you to try it. But not only try it, test God on it. And those aren't my words. That's what God tells us. Test me on this. This is the one area in the Bible where we are told to test God. From the book of Malachi. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse so that there will be enough food in my temple. If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing so great that you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it. Put me to the test. And so that's what we're going to do together. If you're unsure about giving, if you've never tried tithing before, or even if you're struggling or you're in debt, I invite you to try it and go on this journey of the 90-day tithing challenge with us. The other card in your median is your communication card. This is how you would share information with us or request more information from us about what is going on in DR. And then on the back are some different kind of responses that you might have to the message. And the first response you'll see is, I will do the 90-day tithing challenge. So if you want to accept God's invitation to test God with your tithe, mark your card. Then over the next 90 days, give to DR in a way that we can track. A check, cash in an envelope with your name on it, or you can use the credit or debit that's on the square in the back. But if you do use that, we need a way to tell that it's you, because unless you add a note or you print your name when you sign it, all we get is like your card number and a signature that like is impossible to read. So every year around tax time, we're trying to be like, I decipher scribbles. So if you want, and the reason that we want to be able to track your tithing during this time is that because at the end of the 90 days, if you want, we will give it all back to you. We will give all the money that you give back, no questions asked. Now, I do not promise you that if you give, God is going to come back and reward you 100-fold, or that you will miraculously be blessed financially. You may be. I've certainly heard testimonies from others who have trusted in God with their tithe, and God met their need through some unexpected and miraculous financial provision. God is capable of amazing things, and that may happen, but that's not exactly what I'm promising. Here is my promise. If after 90 days you don't feel like God has grown you or blessed you spiritually, if you don't feel that you are more free in this area, DR will give you your money back. This is God's promise. If we open our hearts to God, if we trust in God, if we give to God's mission in the world, we will be blessed in turn. We will grow in faith and our trust will be met. If you give and you take this challenge and you think at the end it doesn't work, you aren't convinced that God has been true to God's word, we'll give you the money back. Now, to be very clear, we don't need your money. This is not, I don't want this to sound like some push to get your money. It's not about that. DR is honestly doing very well financially right now. In fact, even just a few months ago, the new director of ENR2, the building that we are in, decided that campus groups shouldn't be paying to use the rooms in here. So we're no longer being charged to use this or the children's rooms apart from like a small custodial fee. And DR doesn't pay for mine or any staff salary. Instead, like I kind of mentioned earlier, we raise our salaries from the support of people who generously give because they believe in the work God is doing here. So instead, any money that you do give to DR, that goes towards ministry resources, curriculum for our children so that we can help them also learn to grow and love Jesus. It goes to the food after church like we had the last couple of weeks. It pays for the materials like the medians that you're holding. And then 50% goes back out, goes outside our community to bless others. It pays for the water table and the mobile food bank that we do on campus. It goes to support missionaries in Mexico and Haiti. It supports Blood Water Mission to help bring clean drinking water wherever there isn't access to any, and Preemptive Love Coalition, who goes into countries like Syria and Iraq to invest in local institutions and to provide emergency relief, life-saving surgeries, and education. If you want to give to DR because you believe in that mission, because it is your community and it is good to give to your spiritual home, that is good. That is what God encourages us to do. But I just want to make sure that we are transparent about where your money goes when you give it here and you don't feel coerced into giving or being misled. So if you are new here, if you're unsure about how you feel about God or the church, it's okay if you don't want to give to us. That's absolutely okay. You do not have to if you are not comfortable with that. But we can only uphold our end of the 90-day tithing challenge and give you your money back if you do give to us. But if you're comfortable with that, I encourage you to give. There's no problem if you give it to somebody else. I encourage you to choose an organization that you trust and whose mission that you believe in and give generously. Trust God and test God in giving generously. Now, take a look at your card. Look it over and see how are your financial vital signs doing. Consider where you need to do more work. And commit to developing the practices that you need to improve your vital signs. And plan on doing more than just one checkup a year, the next time we talk about finances here. And consider where you're coming from. If you were never taught the skills that you need by your parents or whoever to steward your finances well, then start now. One thing you can do is you can take the next step after today, and you can take part in financial foundations if you're a student, or financial peace if you're not in college and you're working a full-time job. These are financial education courses that are put together by Dave Ramsey, who I've mentioned a few times. They will help you create a budget and provide accountability as you learn to stick to it. They'll give you tools and teach you good habits built on good biblical principles to build up your financial foundation and to find peace. If you're interested in one of these courses, there's another response that you can mark on your card, and we'll follow up with you about the information that you need about those courses and how you can take them and such. So as we leave here today, as we look ahead to better financial health, consider inheritance. As we saw from the clips earlier, we get a lot of how we take care of our finances from our parents. I've talked a lot about the lessons of my parents, specifically my dad, and what they have taught me. It isn't lost on me how blessed I am to have the parents I have. My dad especially has taught me so much, and he continues to teach me so much. He's a wonderful resource that I can go to for advice and guidance with my budgeting, my saving, and just any and all of my finances. The greatest inheritance I will receive from my father is these scripts that he has given me to steward my finances from me and my family, and I can enjoy it now with him. And I'm not telling any of you this. I don't want to make anybody here feel less. If your experience is different, if you are instead of using the scripts, instead you're struggling to fight these scripts handed down to you, rather than follow them into the same financial hole as your parents, I don't want you to feel discouraged. But the work you have to do to change the story of your family's financial health is difficult, but it is important. As I talk about the good lessons I was handed, I don't want anybody to feel ashamed. I am no more responsible for the lessons that I was given than anyone else is. So rather than any of us regretting the parents we have or wishing that we had better lessons handed down to us, let's start learning a better way ourselves. But not only for ourselves, but so that we have better lessons to hand down to our children. Consider the inheritance that we have to give them, not out of the savings we have left to leave them, but out of the lessons that we have to teach them so that their vital signs are always strong. Consider the gifts that we may give them so that they have the skills to steward their blessings well, to live freely of earthly trappings, wisely prepare for the dangers of this world, and to give generously and joyously to the mission of God. Imagine what it would be like if your child could one day stand before you and say the things about you like what I've said about my dad. Imagine what it would be like, regardless of the financial scripts that we've inherited from our parents, if we could give godly, healthy habits and skills to the next generation. To know that we have not only stewarded our resources in a manner pleasing to God, but that we have equipped our children to do the same. What an inheritance to leave behind. Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I just pray to you as we check our vital signs, we check our finances, Lord. Wherever we are at, Lord, may we be encouraged that if we put our trust in you, that you bless us, that you are there for us, and that we are not alone, that we do have a community, that we have friends here who can support us, keep us accountable, wherever we're at as we, work to improve and to grow in this area so that we do not become subjects to money, Lord, but that we can be free to follow you, to honor you with a stewardship of the resources you have blessed us with, to give generously to your mission, Lord, to join in on the good work that you do here and in our lives. I praise you and thank you in your holy name. Amen.